Welcome to Trailer Rewind. Every month we go back and look at a film that Pete and Andy talked about in their trailer picks from the regular show. We watch it and have a very spoilery discussion about it. Today we're going to talk about Odd Thomas. This was Pete's pick from February 7th, 2014. Pete said he was really nervous about this one. He's a big fan of pulp crime novels, including Dean Koontz. He said his father-in-law had introduced him to the Odd Thomas series of books and described that as sort of a horror mystery comedy series, and he was excited that he heard it was going to be released back in 2013, and then it was shelved, and he feared that it would never see the light of day. He was sort of bittersweet about hearing that when it finally got released, it was a straight-to-digital release, but he did look forward to this as sort of an empty calories type film that's enjoyable, but not a whole lot to it. JJ, as someone who's not a fan of the horror genre, what did you think of Odd Thomas?
Well, you say that, and I just feel like I should explain myself. It's not that I don't like horror. Wait, I totally don't like horror. That's true, and it's only because I don't like being scared, and I get scared super easily. So, if we talk about horror in particular, and in particular Odd Thomas, I did get scared a couple times. So if that was the purpose of the film, then it accomplished that. So I have to be very objective in the way that I look at horror and the value of horror that's out there, because I personally don't attach positive emotions to negative emotions like being terrified. However, the Odd Thomas I thought was enjoyable for other reasons, and some of the other things that I like about movies that are typically put into the scary movie sort of genres in that bucket, I can still go and see, because if they are thought out in their mythology, if they are clever, if they are cute in the case of Odd Thomas, if they spend some time with the story and make interesting characters, and I thought that was all present here. I thought the story in general had some neat twists and turns that I didn't expect, and that I was really looking through the entire time I was in the film, trying to figure out who the big bad was throughout, and I didn't guess it, and so it turned out to be kind of a mystery in that respect too. So it definitely felt like a book. That's kind of what I think the thing that I want to say here in my opening statement, because I think I've watched it now twice, and going back the second time, it really feels like a book, and it really feels scripted to that nature. But if you're looking for something, you said empty calories, if you're looking for some good kind of suspenseful cotton candy, cute fun on Netflix, this is going to be a good film for you, in my opinion. What did you think, Steve?
Well, I agree with you. There's a big challenge when you're going to make a film off a series of books that have a fan base to them, because it's really going to depend. Something particularly like this is the execution of taking something that has really a unique tone to it, because you say that, as a horror film, I mean, this isn't, something that I think is going to keep people up at night, just terrified of every little bump in the house. It does have some intense, scary moments to it, but that's really balanced by the mystery story that you spoke about. And I think to execute that it can carry over in a book really well, because you have that depth of getting to know the characters, to get to know the world, to really establish that tone. And in a film having less than 2 hours, the writing's got to do a lot of heavy lifting to get all of that packed in there, if you're counting on that for the execution of the film. And I think they tried to accomplish that through a lot of the voiceover work, the narration that Odd Thomas does to really introduce us to this town, himself, all the people we encounter. There was a lot of that at the front end of this film to just get us acquainted with this really unique world that the story is going to take place in.
Yeah, it almost felt like a TV series with over-the-top narration to me, in that every time they move set pieces, they kind of led with a clever little jingle and a little bit of odd being the character now, odd narration over the top. And that it really felt sort of serial in that nature. It felt like I was reading the chapters of a book or watching a television show in that way.
Yeah, I think, that's something that probably I haven't read any of the books to sort of get a sense of the structure or sequence of how the stories are told, the chapters, of how they're structured in the book. But I could have seen this as something that was perhaps built as possibly launching a franchise. You've got the series of books to draw on. You want to establish a certain expectation, and that loyalty to the book, the sort of very serialized nature of that fits with something that would be adapted. I don't know if back in, I guess, 2012, 2013, we hadn't really gotten into that world of the direct to streaming via Netflix or other networks to take something and really expand it into a larger piece instead of cramming it all into a 90-minute movie, but saying, hey, we're gonna take these books and we're gonna do this as a series on Hulu or Netflix or Amazon, and really spend some time to really spread the story out to get into the character development. This was really rushed and condensed to fit everything in, and to me, it gave the sense of a story that was almost, I guess the word I could think of is hyper real. It is a realistic world, but things are so, I guess, kicked up a notch to another level. It's almost like a modern fantasy tale because
Totally.
it's you could see the nature of these characters, their relationships. It's very real, but almost at an exaggerated level.
Right. And to the degree where it's meant to be a super real caricature of what character connections could be, or what sort of allegiances, what kind of trusts are out there, and things like that. I don't think it shied away from that. I like that it went through that door and said, "This is what we are. This is what the characters were. This is, I guess, what I see is the characters were like that in the book. So let's go ahead and do it in the movie and just go all the way."
Yeah, because we're dropped right into the middle of everything. This isn't an origin story. This isn't Odd, discovering his powers and establishing himself. He's already had this for, this is who he is. We're dropped into just this specific point in his life and the relationships he has with the other characters. He's got to fill us in on those. But I think that's, to me, one of the enjoyable aspects was I didn't have to sit through a lot of the getting to know all the characters. These characters all know each other and have history that they can refer to as needed. And we just sort of have to jump in and move along with them without having to let the story try to explain all of that.
Yeah, I think they did that really gracefully. The fact that they didn't feel they need to make a third of the film about the origin, I thought the way that they taught us about the mythology and his powers and all that stuff, it gave us much more license for suspension of disbelief when other things come up later in the film. It just seemed like additional parts of his powers, maybe he has a spidey sense in addition to whatever he's got going on. All of that seemed more acceptable based on the fact that they just took it and ran with it.
I've also seen it twice, and I think the first viewing, it took me a while to get a sense of how the film was going to balance all the different aspects of the horror, the mystery, and the comedy to really wrap my head around what I should be expecting from the film. And the second time through, I was able to enjoy it a lot more, sort of getting the sense of it's that light, pulpy type of film. And I'm willing to sort of set aside some of those weaknesses, knowing that that's really what the film is going for, I think, or striving for, was sort of this lighter, odd, unique tone that I'm willing to, I guess, be a little bit more forgiving with some of those more heavier handed aspects of we're going to dump all of this sort of exposition through voiceover, that usually it's sort of a cheat or a shortcut of, well, if I just tell you everything, then we can move along. But because it's such a fun place to be and I enjoy the characters.
Do you mean Pico Mundo is a very fun place to be? I think it's amazing.
A unique place to be. Yes.
I think and it's New Mexico, so everything was filmed in New Mexico. But I think it's so amazing how everywhere anyone goes in the story is just loaded with people. It's the most popular place. The mall is immensely popular. It's like every store has a going out of business sale at the time that they're in the mall, and then the bowling alley, literally. Every lane is taken up with 3 different teams of bowlers. I don't know how they fit them all in, but it is loaded with bowling alleys or bowling players. I just think it's amazing. Pico Mundo seems like the most fun place ever if there wasn't these sort of, crazy, terrible deaths going on everywhere.
Oh, it's the largest small town you've ever been in. It's a small town that's got, hundreds of thousands of people apparently living there.
Yes. And they all hang out together all the time.
Yes, exactly. But that's, I think, the tone of it's something my wife and I have talked a lot about in just what we see in movies and TVs of everything has to be so realistic and gritty. And what I really appreciate about this is almost that throwback to the 50s of like the aspirational, we can set an ideal of like, it would be great if, everybody got together, was hanging out at the bowling alley and everybody is just really kind to their neighbors. Yeah, there's the dark underside that's going on, but there's just, when else can you have sort of this outsider character like Odd just, sort of call up the police chief and say, hey, I know you're having date night with your wife, but hey, could you come and check this out? And be like, sure, Odd, no problem. I'll be there in just a minute.
And they did that like 4 times, right?
Yes, exactly.
They have 4 date nights or 4 uncomfortable situations that they tried to
interruptions. Yes,
with Willem Dafoe, which is perfect for him as a cast there. Pico Mundo. I'm looking at the translation. I thought Pico was some version of small. It actually, what I'm seeing here is like peak, P-E-A-K. So peak of the world, Mundo is world, so it's like top of the world, that kind of thing. I don't know. That might be a throw out to Dean Koontz of what he's trying to talk about there. But I think that's interesting when you consider that you talk about that maybe like that Pleasantville, hyper-real, aspirational world that's going on there, and Dean Koontz names it, the peak world that we could have there.
We've talked about this world. We should probably talk about the people that are inhabiting this world. And one of the reasons we picked this, I think, for October was, Odd Thomas is a horror film. It's sort of fitting for October. But we also had talked about this as being sort of our Anton Yelchin memorial episode. He passed away this summer. And it was an opportunity to really talk about him and his work and, really as, the lead in this film. For me, this was just a role that it was very fitting for him, because when I think back to his work in Star Trek and the other film that really comes to mind for me with him is Charlie Bartlett, which was again another really sort of quirky film where he is a character that's sort of this outsider, but is able to really just establish these trusting relationships with people. And to me, it's just something that came across in this as well of you just have to love Odd. He just gets along with everybody. He's such a quirky person, but he's so accepted by everybody. And to me, it was just a perfect casting for him because he just seems like, how can you not like this guy?
Yeah, completely likable and really a great performance as well. I think really of everyone in the film, I thought I was the most bought into him. And that might just be because he's so likable in that respect, but it was really positive. I was super happy with what he was doing there. And how terrible is it that he died? It's just, I'm looking at his IMDb now, and I haven't seen Charlie Bartlett, but I've seen tons of things with him in it. He has a huge list of different things that he's done. And then the great stuff that he was doing with Star Trek too. I mean, I feel like he was mainstreaming in a way that someone like me who hadn't seen his earlier stuff or recognized him as a character actor in that earlier stuff, that he was starting to really kind of make some waves for someone who's just me on the outside. And I loved what he was doing with Chekhov. He's born in Russia originally, but called an American actor. And then you talk about the way he died in that freak accident. And the first time I watched it, I didn't pay attention. But when you saw that other seer that he's having the conversation with, mowed down by like a truck, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. It sounds like you've seen more of his stuff.
Well, again, I mean, I'm familiar with him with the Star Trek, but looking back, I think it's his early years. It was a lot of stuff when he was a little kid, perhaps younger on TV that I wasn't as familiar with. But if anybody hasn't seen Charlie Bartlett, I do recommend it. It also stars Hope Davis as his mom and Robert Downey Jr. as the principal of the public high school where Charlie Bartlett, it's the last option left to him because he's been kicked out of every other private school.
Wow.
And it's just, again, something that really was a fitting role for him. Again, sort of a quirky tone, but again, you just really connect with this character of Charlie Bartlett, who's trying to be well liked in his school, where he's really the outcast.
Yeah,
and I think that's something I saw again in Odd Thomas. I don't recall seeing Terminator Salvation. I think that's one of. I think I stopped after Terminator 3, so I didn't see him in Terminator Salvation to be able to really see how he pulled off, Kyle Reese in that one. But again, I think the direction he was going, somebody I was really looking forward to enjoying where his career was moving. And again, just such a tragic loss.
Yeah. Yeah. He still has films in post-production. There's going to be more of him on screen. There's a couple here that say 2016, but which we don't have a whole lot of time left. But one saying we don't belong here, and Rememory, which I'm not sure what those are, and then one for 2017 called Thoroughbred. So I mean, for a younger guy with a whole lot of credits and still stuff coming out, it's just really sad to see him pass away.
So I mean, again, really solid performance. I mean, he really carried, I think, this film. We've also got, you mentioned Willem Dafoe as Chief Wyatt Porter, which Willem Dafoe is always somebody, I always wonder about the roles he takes, because it can go from such dark roles to something just so light. Yeah. With this one as the chief of police, again, who's just so accessible and just a good-natured guy.
Yeah, and one of the most flexible actors, right?
Yes.
I mean, this reminded me of the role he played in Boondock Saints.
Oh yeah,
when he was the investigator there,
right?
And they sort of trickled into his personal life there too. It really felt a lot like that, and I thought he did a great job.
We also had other sort of lead we have is his Odds Thomas's girlfriend Stormy, played by Addison Timlin, who I think mismatched really with Anton in terms of being able to really carry a performance. For me, I'm not familiar with her at all, but it really felt like, I guess, more TV than film to me.
Yeah, and I think she's really pretty, but I think she was I think she was placed there because she's so striking.
Yes.
And I don't think, one of the things that, if we talk about my complaints about the films or my critique about the film, was that it felt like a book a lot. And a lot of her dialogue, she delivered like it was a line that I was reading, as opposed to her being embodying a character and delivering it. The whole idea of my odd one, or her addressing him with this pet name. I totally see how that would work in a book, but and maybe it's something she could have done. Maybe it's something that they could have eliminated from the dialogue altogether. But she just felt really wooden, and at times I felt like they were missing a piece of chemistry that was so important when they had this sort of we're going to be together, this sort of Forrest and Jenny relationship, where it should have been more serious between them, and they didn't. Like you said, there was a little bit of a miscast there because Anton really carried Odd in a way that Addison didn't do with Stormy.
Right, yeah, and I agree. I think the tragedy of their relationship would have carried a lot more weight for me. I think would have really strengthened the ending of the film and the tone of where it went, that it just wasn't capable of getting there. And that's, I think, sort of one of the issues I had with it, is it starts off, really moving along, and as things slow down at the end, there should be some you should really feel the heaviness of loss at the end of the film, and it just really didn't come through. And I think that it does come down to, as you said, the lack of chemistry between them.
Yep.
There were two other familiar faces that I had not expected to see the first time I saw this, and the one that I sort of tack up to stunt casting is Arnold Vosloo, who plays
Should
Tom,
I know him?
Tom Jed, who is like the ghost that is hanging out at the auto shop, who's got his arm lost. Yes,
the
Arnold Vosloo.
Guy.
Yes, the jokey guy who's will take his dismembered arm to scratch his crotch. I call it stunt casting because Odd Thomas, this film was directed by Stephen Sommers, who directed The Mummy.
And he's the guy. He's the
Arnold
mummy.
Vosloo was the mummy in that one. So it's a bit of humorous stunt casting for just that brief scene. And then...
Well, they should have had some beetles or scarabs coming out of his mouth. That would have been funny too.
Yes. And then Patton Oswalt, who I did not expect to see. Again, just a very small bit part. And this one as Ozzie Boone, who delivers a very crucial piece of jewelry to Odd at a pivotal point in the story that is going to help save someone's life. And those, to me, that was sort of the cast as I saw it, because it really is Odd and Stormy and the Chief that really the story moves around them. I was surprised. We do have a lot of minor characters. And something that really shocked me, I think, the first time was we we have a scene early in the film where Odd is over at the Chief's for a barbecue, and we meet the Chief's daughter.
Yep.
And to have her introduced,
that was
early
his
on,
daughter. I didn't realize that was his daughter. That makes sense.
That was his daughter, and she's sort of flirting with Odd and everything
in a totally creepy way.
Yes, and which isn't going to work. I mean, he's devoted to Stormy, but then to see her death later on in the film was something that really caught me off guard, because there's lots of death in this film that goes about, but to me this was one of the more shocking ones, because we have such a close relationship with the Chief.
Yep.
To have him lose his daughter was really surprising. I could see where that in a book, but to have that in a film where you think how you're going to have the audience really connecting with the character, because that in my opinion, puts us in a really interesting position with how we're going to now perceive the Chief, who we have seen, as I said, sort of as this lighter character. How is he going to respond to the loss of his daughter? We don't really have a lot of time with that. And so it really struck me as a interesting choice to have it be her versus just some other, teenage girl from the town.
Yeah, and I think that's why I didn't imagine her as his daughter, because they really don't touch on the fact that she affects the Chief and his wife at all when she dies. Yeah. I didn't even catch that. But then you think about the care, and here, we're getting really into the spoilers, but you think about the care that they give to the death of Stormy at the end, and how much time they really spend examining the grief that little group of our principal characters is experiencing through that death, and how it's really just not balanced with the other characters. That, of course, if this was the daughter of the Chief, there would be a much bigger deal made about her death at the time. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And it comes back to that sort of the lighter tone, this balance that I think Stephen Sommers is trying to strike in this adaptation of the intensity of the horror, the frightening side, the mystery, and then the comedy to keep things. And to me, that was one piece that just didn't really sort of fit. And I see one of the things you brought up, in your notes was, comparison of this to The Frighteners.
Yeah.
Which I hadn't even really thought about. It's been years since I've seen The Frighteners, but I don't know if you want to sort of delve into that a little bit about what similarities.
Well, I had the reason why I asked the question in the show notes is because, of course, since it's a movie about getting scared, I totally haven't seen it. However, when Odd Thomas, when I watched it, and then I thought about what I knew about that movie and about how a character, so Michael J. Fox in The Frighteners, from what I understand, right? This is a Peter Jackson movie with Michael J. Fox, and he has a talent like Odd that he uses to early in the film. He uses it for conning people, and he uses it for negative purposes. But through the course of the movie, realizes that he can be a hero. So I felt like, as I was watching the Odd Thomas story, that the sort of story vignette about what The Frighteners is kind of what Odd Thomas is going through too, in that he has this talent that he uses for good, but does it kind of secretly and does it, minimally. But then all of a sudden there's this major event that he has to turn around and save Pico Mundo, town, save the town, and lose the girl. So I was wondering if there's a connection there. Have you seen The Frighteners?
It's been a long time, but
sure.
I definitely, even to the point of tone of something that's dark and has frightening moments, but also the comic lighter side to it, I'd say definitely this is a compliment to that. If cool. Odd Thomas is something that you enjoyed, the feel of that film, where you're okay with getting a few little scary, intense things, but knowing that it's balanced out, Frighteners is definitely something that is worth checking out, because it does have that oddness, the quirkiness to it. And it will give you the creeps at some points, but and some jumps, but you're going to come out having had a really good time with it.
Yeah, I like that. So dark in tone, but light in weight. I think that's good.
Yeah, exactly. So we could talk about first shot, last shot. So as it's easy for us to do that here on Trailer Rewind, because we're usually watching these on Netflix or Hulu. So it's really easy to go back and say, okay, what was that first shot? What was the last shot?
Yeah.
This one was interesting because it really starts as this crane shot coming down from the sun in the sky to the Welcome to Pico Mundo sign. and then sort of moving into the town, which then leads us into the opening sequence where we get a tour of the town. The film ends with Odd Thomas. He's walking through the desert. He walks up a hill that's overlooking Las Vegas. And then actually the final shot is him sort of looking out at Las Vegas, saying the line, I have a lot of work to do.
Right.
So sort of the transition from the small town to taking on sort of the larger task at hand that he's set out to do.
The greater evil that is Las Vegas.
Yes, exactly. So I think sort of works in bridging the beginning of small town to larger of, again, I think with the intent of launching this possibly as a franchise, worked to take us from small to large. So it's a case where I think it was perhaps quite intentional.
Yeah, and I think it could be done for two reasons there. I think that if they really do want to make it a series, which I kind of question just because of the cast and because of the tone, the things we talked about how they weren't trying to be overly serious about taking the narration into dialogue, and sort of they let it be the book, which made it feel like a really sort of nicely wrapped piece. So I don't get the sense that that's what they were intending to do, to make it a series, and because of the fact that it came out 2013. So so it doesn't look like that's happening, whether or not that's because of money, but also potentially because of the way the script reads. I feel like it might just trying to stay true to the actual story in the book, in the original material. Whether or not, and I haven't read any of them. I didn't even know it was a series until you mentioned it. So I think that would be interesting to check out. I think the pulp nature of it says this is the next step on Odd's journey, which could be the second step. So, and it leaves it open-ended to do that too. I think what you said was the small town to bigger purpose, or that's kind of what I took away from what you said. And I think that's kind of the neat way to look at maybe what First Shot, Last Shot was in this movie.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to touch on briefly before we start wrapping things up was for a film that, to me, a straight-to-video release, smaller film, something that was shelved for a while. The quality of the visual effects in this for a film that didn't get that big release, I thought we've got a lot of supernatural things going on. We've got the Bodaks with these sort of supernatural bug-like creatures. We've got lots of gateways to different dimensions, a lot of visual effects to show Odd Thomas's interactions with these other dimensions, or his perceptions of things sort of leaking over into our world, which I thought looked really good for what I sort of took as a film that maybe sort of had finished, principal, shooting and then got shelved. I don't know when the delay occurred, but, it still looked like a lot of time and money spent to get those, some pretty good effects up on screen.
Yeah, I agree with you to a point. I think the Bodaks in particular, I thought were clever and different, and the effect worked, especially at the Gateway to Hell stuff. I thought that worked really well, and it totally reminded me of Stranger Things. I think it actually comes off a lot like Stranger Things in the way that they do things in that sort of gateway to the Upside Down. Yeah, there's a parallel there altogether. The place where it didn't work for me is in the simple fire effects. When the what is it, the RV or the mobile home explodes. It was just, that was painted on. It did not work for me, and I feel like they did such a great job and took such care with the other stuff that I agree. I think it looked like it was a little bit more professional than the release it got in terms of that, but the fire effects hit me kind of funny.
I agree. There are some things that look fall a little short of the ideal, but I think maybe because I came with such low expectations with something that was released straight to video, I was expecting some really bad early 2000s style special effects where it just doesn't really sort of map onto the real world.
Right.
But this I think things looked really well integrated in there.
I'd be interested to find out how Dean Koontz puts to words the Bodaks. How he described them, because you mentioned that it was like a bug, and they kind of did look like that. I'm actually searching around the web right now to find it. I see that it's spelled, this is not something that I would have known from hearing it, is Bodach, and that it's a Scottish Gaelic thing for old man, rustic, churl, or lout. But they also it's been a boogeyman figure in Gaelic folklore. So I think that's interesting. And a lot of the different things here that I'm just looking at Wikipedia, but I'm seeing things like talking about it as like an old clown or an old cloak, which is kind of different. Reminds me more of the Harry Potter folks.
The Dementors. Yeah.
In Odd Thomas, he talks about it here because I haven't read. Neither one of us have read the book, but it talks about describing them as shadow-like creatures that are invisible to most people, but not specific. I'd be interested to see how he described it, and to also see how he feels they were represented in the film, because I think that would be really interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, because I think there's the challenge of, again, bringing something described to the visual representation to encapsulate that, to bring across that creep factor that you can spend so much time with words to develop, and rely on a reader's imagination. However, when actually presenting it there, I think this is a greater challenge, because you can allude to something as being really shadowy and scary, and makes your skin crawl. Throw it up there on the screen, and people look at that and say, "Oh yeah, it looks like a giant bug."
Did you find them scary?
I thought they were inhuman enough,
right?
That they were definitely they were human-esque qualities with the mouth, but the legs. So there's between a lot of things that I've seen, like Cloverfield. We're always trying to come up with more different types of bug-like monsters. So it's nothing that made my skin crawl or anything, but I think the sort of semi-transparent nature of them, they can walk among people without being seen, and when Odd sees them, he sees them, but still sort of as a ghostly outline, so he knows they're there. It worked. It gave me a sense of something that if I were confronted with, and right there, it would definitely freak me out.
Totally.
But it's again, it's that challenge of, it can be described one way, and there was one other scene in the book that sort of bothered me, and again, it's that challenge of bringing the book to the movie, because in a book you can describe a character, or you can have somebody, but you can withhold details.
Sure.
Because there's a scene when Odd goes to a house and he's hiding, and a character walks out of the house, and we only see like the shoes and lower pants of this person and hear their voice.
Okay.
Because clearly we can't see that person's face, because then we're going to recognize the actor. And if it's somebody we've already seen before, it's going to sort of blow the big reveal later on.
Right.
Whereas I think in a book, you can, the person's voice or face isn't going to give it away, because if that character hasn't seen that person before, they're not going to recognize that person. But for us as an audience, we may recognize that actor. So it was one of those things where I thought, oh, you're not showing me this because clearly it's somebody that I've seen before. So who are the characters I've seen? Let me try to piece this together. It's one of those, real tough challenges of how an author can withhold certain details, have a character present, but still disguise their identity. That's much more challenging to pull off in a film.
Yeah, and interesting, the idea of not being able to see faces. The scariest part to me was where he started having the first flashes of the bowling alley workers. I was going to say the bowling team, but the bowling alley workers, where they were approaching him and being faceless. That was the most horrifying part of the movie for me. I had to kind of break away a little bit at that point.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. I guess closing comments.
Sure.
On the film.
I think people should see it. I think it's totally fun, and this is a perfect film for Trailer Rewind. I think if you find it if you see it in Netflix, if Netflix suggests it for you, or it's the kind of film that you dig, meaning the horror comedy suspense thing, it's somewhat lightweight enough for you to enjoy it. If you definitely like those kind of suspense things, it's usually too much for me. I wouldn't choose it if we weren't doing it, but it totally works for me. And I loved the bookended story. I loved the fact that it was all wrapped up, and that in general we had a pretty much ultimate protagonist who figured out the way to get through everything. That's the kind of thing I dig, and I think it's enjoyable, it's cute, it's fun, and it makes for a great Netflix night.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a lighter film. It's enjoyable, has those touches of darkness. I wouldn't call it horror, compared to a lot of the other things that are out there that are definitely not something I'm really into. But that darkness is just enough for me. If I had seen this as like a young teenager, I think I would have really, really loved this film. It's enjoyable, but it is lightweight. It's because it was released straight to video. I couldn't find information about a rating on this film because I was struggling with, would this have come out as an R film? Because there's, some pretty gory things in the intensely frightening scenes, such as the bowling, the faceless bowlers. Or would this be sort of a PG-13 that's really sort of straddling that higher end of PG-13? Because as I watched it that second time, I thought, okay, my kids, they're 14 and 16. Yeah, there's some intense pieces, but probably be okay because it's not so much that I think it's, disturbingly frightening. I think there's, a few things that are unsettling. But I think this really straddles that line where if you're looking for something, that's, and you're not into horror, you're looking for something around, Halloween that I think for older kids would definitely be, appropriate and enjoyable. I think definitely younger kids, way too intense for them.
Yeah.
But for something that, as a family without getting, if you're not into the really disturbing, like Sinister and The Conjuring and all of those things that to me are really dark and upsetting, this is something that can have a little fright to it, but still be enjoyable. But that when you turn it off, you don't feel like you have to have all the lights on.
Right.
But, you've watched a good adventure, mystery with some darkness to it that everybody can enjoy.
Yep. Yeah. And I would also mention that there is a bit of graphic violence and some gore.
Yes.
And that's kind of a thing too. I'm glad you mentioned the Conjuring aspect of it. Those are the things that I think would get people to not want to see it. I had it up a little bit too loud when I was watching it the second time, and my wife came out and was like, wow, what is that? So again, the kind of thing of, if that's not an environment you're comfortable with, then it's great because it's like cotton candy fun. Right.
All right. So on your flick chart, where did this one fall on your flick chart?
Well, I'm not super happy because it feels low for me. It felt really hard to rank it, I guess, against other films. You mentioned the direct-to-video. It had a $27 million budget and went direct-to-video, but it's still kind of fun and special. I liked it better than where it ended up. So after I watched it the first time, which was in August when we first talked about it, it was up in the low 80s for me. It shows up now at 91 out of 122, which feels just way too low for me. I have it below Say Anything. It's not going to beat Say Anything. And I have it above The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, which most people like a little bit more than I do. But but so it goes in there. I think it's fun. I think it deserves a higher rank. I just think that down in this area, we have a lot of movies that are big movies that I just don't like as much as other people. And in most cases, I don't think I can put Odd Thomas above those.
Oh, I hear you. So for me, it came in just about right in the middle of my chart. It's 103 out of 204.
That's great.
It's just below Batman Begins.
Oh.
And just above Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, which I enjoy, but I don't know, when I first saw that, I didn't click with that movie as much as a lot of other people my age did at that time. So
I think
it's enjoyable, but it just...
I think parts of it that irritate in tone.
Yeah. Yes.
San Dimas is Pico Mundo. I know this.
Yes. So So I think it's in a good spot where it's above a lot of other things, and then just below Bill and Ted is Robot and Frank, which is another small film that's really enjoyable. Something you'll watch maybe once or twice, and you may not ever come back to. But as you're watching it, you're going to really enjoy it and have a good time. And to me, Odd Thomas is one of those films. I had a really good time watching it. I'm probably not going to come back to it that often. Again, maybe with the kids around Halloween, but it's definitely an enjoyable film.
Yep.
All right. Well, now that we've rewound, let's fast forward to what's coming up on the next reel. Pete and Andy are in their very short series, This Is Real Life, Jack. So they've got some more of that coming along. And then later this month, the Film Board is meeting to take on Jack Reacher, Never Go Back.
Which I'm super excited about because first of all, I didn't know it was a series of books. So there's that connection with Odd Thomas here. But the other thing is, you guys have been talking about it and I didn't see the first one. So I went out and got it from my library and I really liked the first one. So I don't have the connection to the books like you and Pete do, but I thought the first movie was really excellent and really fun. So I'm very excited to see the new one.
I'm glad you enjoyed the first one. It's one I'm looking forward to revisiting before heading out to the theater to see Never Go Back when it comes out in a couple of weeks. But yeah, I had thought about going back and reading, the first Jack Reacher novel or whatever, the first one. But after reading Never Go Back, yeah, I'm just not a fan of the books. However, I am, a little intrigued. And if I do have some summer reading that I'm needing to fill some space in, I may, throw that Odd Thomas series in there for some sort of light, pulpy fun in the summer. I think this series might be something to fill that niche for me.
It's got to be a quick read, right? I mean, I would assume that it has that cotton candy thing to the book as well. It's pulpy.
It is, yeah, I imagine. And I really enjoyed the characters in the world, so it's something that I have a feeling I could probably easily jump into.
Nice.
JJ, it's been great having this conversation with you about Odd Thomas. I think we can definitely tell Pete he won us over on this one, and that there's, his fears about this one were unfounded, because I think this is one, if he hasn't already added to his library, I'm sure he will quickly add it after we talk with him about it.
I think so too, and I actually think he may have already seen it, being that it was out in 2013, so it'll be fun to talk to him about it too.
Yeah. All right, well, you have a good night, sir.
Yeah, you too. See you later.